Hi everyone, thank you for joining this webinar today called Living Hmong Studies, Building the Hmong Studies with Dr. Mai See Thao. My name is Lisa.
And my name is RC Jean.
We will be the moderators for this webinar on behalf of the Ntaub research team here at UW-Madison with the Center for Research on College Workforce Transitions. During this webinar, there will be built-in breaks between sections, so feel free to post questions or comments in the chat function at any time, and we will collect them for the break periods.
Yeah. And before we start, we would like to introduce our special guest, Dr. Mai See Thao. Dr. Thao is a trained medical anthropologist with research interests in historical trauma, displacement, the refugee body, biopolitics, care, and community-based participatory research. This past spring, it was announced that Dr. Thao will be the new director of Hmong Studies and an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology, Global Religions, and Cultures at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here and that you guys invited me. Yeah.
Yeah. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. I've working remotely. I've been able to, I've trained my kids enough to know that mommy's working, so you stay up here. Because sometimes they like to come through the door and say hi to people that I'm in a Zoom meeting with.
Yeah, that must be kind of hard handling all of that and juggling everything.
Yeah, it's not so bad. Yeah.
Yeah, so would you mind sharing a little bit more about your background, like who you are, where you're from, and your upbringing?
Yeah. No, I was thinking like that was like such a hard question. Like, what do I want people to know about me?
Mhm.
I think yeah, I'm the second wave of Hmong refugee resettlement in the US. And what does that mean, right? So I was the last child to be born in Bonvinai before my parents resettled here in the US. And being the second wave of Hmong refugee resettlement, I think there were particular types of challenges that I grew up with. We weren't the first wave who were often associated with the U.S. In the military, right? And so we came as far more disadvantaged refugees. And we settled here in Wisconsin following my mom's extended relatives. And so, we resettled in Chicago, moved to Milwaukee, and then moved to Green Bay. And then my parents eventually bought a house during a time in which they provided a lot of refugee assistance and assisting refugee families in buying homes. And so my parents bought a house like out in rural Wisconsin. So I grew up in like the small town. And whenever I say this to people outside of Wisconsin, people they'll be like, "Oh, I can hear your accent." And I say, "I grew up in rural Wisconsin," right? And yeah, and so that town is really small. I grew up from 2,000 people in my class. My graduating class was like 89 or something. And there wasn't really anything you could do. And so I was often really bored out of my mind. And so I took a lot of classes. Right, I was set on finishing high school and going off to college because I was actually the middle child, and my parents had 9 kids. And so my older brother actually went off to college, and context, for me, I think context is really important. So my father was actually in Laos. He became a teacher in Laos, and then after the war, and in the refugee camps, was also a teacher in the refugee camps. And so we grew up with my dad, teaching us, on the weekends, how to do like basic math. And so like, as kids, we play pretend, like we would be teacher and student. And, I thought maybe I'd become a teacher one day. And so, just having that exposure, and I think it's really important to say that, right? Having that exposure to your parents teaching you, it really set up my brother to go to school, and then having him do that really was just like a chain effect, right? Where my sister went to school, and then I was like, okay, I want to go to school, and then the rest of my siblings were able to go to school because we were able to see that. Yeah, and so yeah, and I think I grew up in rural Wisconsin, not seeing myself in anything, right? I think similar to what you guys are talking about, the importance of having a curriculum that reflects you. You know, I always tell folks that I grew up, you know, like in classes, we'd learn about the Holocaust, right? And I was telling my, I think middle school teacher at the time, I'm like, I really want to know more about refugees. And she told me that everything about refugees is already done, right? So I'm so excited to be able to do Hmong Studies, right? To talk about refugee experiences and displacement through a Hmong lens, because that has not been done. And then in history class, you know, my history teacher was saying that, you know, history is what I tell you, it's history. But then when he was talking about the Vietnam War, he said, you know, other people fought in this war, but chose not to expand on who the other was. And that was me in the room, right? And he looked at me directly and said, other people were in this room, or like other people were in this war. And so just to kind of feel that, you know, absence while being there at the same time was interesting, you know. And so I think as somebody who has always bordered, right, bordering as the second wave of Hmong refugee resettlement, bordering as the last child born in Bon Binai, like I'm really intrigued by borders as a place of transition, a place of potential. And so I really draw on like Gloria Anzaldúa's work on the borderlands. I think it's really important in the way that I move and how it informs who I am.
Thank you for that. I can totally relate with a lot of like the curriculum stuff in school. So that was amazing. We're going to briefly talk about your background a little bit more in college. What moved you to get a degree in anthropology during your undergrad? And I think this is an important question for me because it's hard to imagine different creative ways to like get your career and like have it support your community as well.
So back to the context of growing up during the second wave, you know, at that time, my parents, as well as other Hmong parents, were saying that you should either become a doctor or a nurse or get a PhD. And so I didn't know, I just knew I was going to get a PhD, right? And like, you know, just the kind of reinforcement that they just kept, you know, telling us, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the top university. I'm going to go to like the best of the best, and I'm going to try to be that. And, you know, I don't say this to perpetuate the model minority stereotype, right? I think that's why the context of me situating the fact that I grew up in rural Wisconsin, I was bored to death, right? Really helped to push me out, right? And to push me into grad school. So I pushed me to undergrad. So I went to Madison. Graduated a semester early because I was so ready to get out. So I started undergrad at the age of 17. And I thought I was going to be a doctor. I thought I would go to med school, right? I wanted to be pre-med. The other life career I had was going to UW-Milwaukee to be to the School of Architecture, which I got accepted into, but I chose not to go. And as I started, you know, undergrad, I actually struggled a lot. And I think it's really important to demystify the fact that, you know, that somebody like me never failed, right? I failed, like I flunked chem, like I flunked, you know, I did really bad with calculus. I had to retake my classes. And I think that was a really hard moment for me in life because I was a straight A student. I graduated top of my high school class. And I didn't know what was going on. You know, but I would often see like I didn't have Hmong friends until I went to Madison. Growing up in a rural town, like we were only one of 3 Hmong families in this little town. And we were the only family of color. So, you know, going to Madison, I had my first Hmong friends, and they were all enrolled in these programs like TRIO, and you know, they had folks to help mentor them. And I really wish I had that, but I didn't. I really ascribed to that very individualistic perspective, thinking that, you know, if I just like pulled myself up by my bootstraps and I can do this, right? But when I failed really hard, right, that was the first time I actually was enrolled in a program to really think about time management, how to study, and just having somebody kind of counsel me through that was really helpful. And I had an advisor at the time who was an academic advisor, and you know, she set me down and was like, well, why don't we look at the courses that you do well in, right? Because apparently, you know, when you fail, you're not a failure all the way. And so just looking at the things that I did well, like it was anthropology, and I was like, okay, well, why don't I just keep taking these classes and see what happens? And and at the time, there was a lot of Hmong American activism on the campus because, there was a law professor, Professor Kaplan, who was saying these racist things about Hmong men, saying that Hmong men know nothing better than to kill, right? And that Hmong women are doing better because Hmong men were dying. And so there was a lot of Hmong American students protesting and demanding for a much more, demand for something to be done, right? And so I sat in those kind of protests. I was a student of those protests. And so it's so exciting to now be on the other end as like a faculty to take into a position, to be in a position that was created by student activism. But when I was an undergrad at Madison, that led to them creating Hmong American Studies classes. And so they hired Dr. Lena Her, who's an anthropologist trained, and she was a visiting assistant professor at UW-Madison. And taking her classes, like it really taught me like to think critically about knowledge and the way that knowledge is produced, to really challenge perceptions about what Hmong means or how Hmong is written about. And so that was just so amazing. And she was an anthropologist, right? And so I knew that the anthropology lens was a lens of potential, right? It was a lens of critique, a lens to speak back. And so I, ended up pursuing it more. And at the time, I feel like I went in it not with this like clear trajectory, right? I think the myth is that people go to school and they become these like wonderful people because they have this clear trajectory in life. But I think sometimes we are shaped by the circumstances around us, and through that, right, and by tapping onto certain strengths that we have, like we transform what we have into something that's really, I think, really productive, right, and really important. So I ended up doing anthropology through that circumstance, right?
Seeing Hmong women in that field and like all the experiences in your undergraduate really like shaped how you wanted to move in the major that you chose, as well as like it like propelled you to be critical about the classes you were in, the spaces you were in. Odyssey's gonna ask the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so as Hmong women in academia, specifically in your field of anthropology, what are some challenges that you face?
As a Hmong woman, so the nice thing when I went to grad school, a lot of the faculty were predominantly women. I know that there were some challenges for other grad students before me when they would, when they had children, people would say, "Oh, you had another baby." And I think it's important to say I'm a mother, right? I actually had a baby in the last year of my when I was dissertating, so almost done with my PhD, and I was pregnant when I got my postdoc. And so, kind of that talk around having family or having a baby, I didn't really face too much of that. I think the only time I felt a little pushback was like, "Oh, you're having another one. When are you going to finish then?" Those are some of the statements that I would get. But I'm the one who typically, when people say those things, I try to show them that they were wrong. So I was like, okay, I'm still going to graduate. I think as a Hmong academic, right, I think it's really important to say that as a Hmong academic, doing work on Hmong people is something that's really important, because I think you tend to get tokenized, right? Your work isn't seen as something that's contributing to the discipline. It's more so it's easier to see my work as Hmong studies than it is to see my work as anthropological. But my work is anthropological, and I do it from a Hmong lens, right? And my work through Hmong studies really informs the field of anthropology. And that is like an articulation that I have to do over and over again, because as a Hmong person doing this work, people, it's easy for them to pigeonhole you and to tokenize you. And, I think that when other scholars do that, I think it's quite sad, because you're caught up more in the racialization of the scholar, right, than the actual ideas that they're trying to produce. And so, yeah, I've faced those challenges, right? And, you know, it's as disheartening as it is, it's actually allowed me to articulate Hmong studies in ways that are much more meaningful, and has actually been able to engage multiple types of audience members.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So going into the Hmong community specifically, were there any challenges that you faced from your own community?
You mean like in terms of like research or in terms of dissemination?
However you want to see it.
Yeah, you know, I think that there is a question of like being authentic, right? Of like, and I think the like how to do research the right way. I like the folks that I interviewed and I formed, you know, relationships with. They are like Ntaub, right? They're that kind of they hold those kind of positionalities. But you know, as somebody who is like, I guess 1.5 generation, right? I'm not really good in terms of like how to say those things or how to like draw our relationships to one another. And they've been so forgiving, right? They've just been so forgiving and so kind, and just so willing to talk to me about their stories and their experiences. And somebody called me there, like she was like, "Oh yeah, I'm here with my friend," right? And this is like a Nithai calling me her friend. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like this is where you transcend like cultural like expectations, and you're just her friend." And it was just such a compliment to me. I felt it was like a compliment. I was really excited. So I feel like I have a lot of support in that way. When I went to disseminate my work, I think because my ideas are a little different. You know, so I do work on diabetes. That was my dissertation. And I think critically about diabetes beyond the biomedical model, right? Because I feel like the biomedical model is so focused on just the body. And it's really hard to think about Hmong experiences as situated within larger social historical issues. And so I was presenting about my work with these Hmong older adults. So when I say older, about 50 years and older, and kind of the experiences that they face, right? Feeling continual forms of displacement, right? Social isolation, with the job market changing, right? Having to feel displaced through that, not having the proper training to join back and join the labor force, right? As it's, you know, as it changes and as companies move abroad. And you know, I was talking about all this at a health fair, and there was a Hmong man who came up to me afterwards and was like, "Did you talk to just like mentally ill people?" Because he wasn't ready to think critically about diabetes beyond the body, right? Diabetes beyond the biomedical paradigm. And so I was like, no, this is a ethnographic study, and these were patients. These were all Hmong patients with type 2 diabetes. And so I think, so I think the challenge is sometimes is like how, you know, I think it is around authenticity, right? Whether you can do research as an authentic Hmong woman, right? Or if you're doing it culturally appropriate way that's respectful. And then I think the pushback is also when you're pushing back on Western paradigms, right? And so sometimes the community is very invested in those Western paradigms. And so when you know, as some of my great friends have been saying, like, I think outside the box. And so when you think outside the box, sometimes there is pushback. Sometimes people aren't ready for that. But, you know, I am excited because I feel like the community here in Wisconsin is so ready to think outside the box. So when I did present it, you know, despite the one comment from that guy, like everybody was like, "This is really great." Even like the older Hmong women in the rooms are like, "This is my experience." And when they said this is my experience, like even if the work is theoretical, like I love getting theoretical in my stuff, but it should map onto their experiences. And when they said it was their experiences, I was like, yes, I did right, you know. And yeah, and so that's also like why I care about doing CBPR, like community-based participatory research, is that the theory, like to bring that back and to share that with the community and to have the community be like, yes, that's exactly what I'm experiencing. That's powerful, right? Because it's naming. I think so much of the time we experience things without knowing what it means or what it is, right? And to be able to name and put a name to that experience, I think is so powerful. I think it then allows us the ability to act, right? And to understand and to heal from these things. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. We're actually going to go into our first set of questions from the audience, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So our first question is there a critique of anthropology that can or should emerge from critical Hmong studies?
Oh, yeah. So that's that's my manuscript that Lisa was referencing earlier when we were talking, right? I think so. Specifically in the field that I work in around diabetes and science and technology studies and anthropology, the literature has talked about the ways in which hope, right? Hope through biomedical expertise allows you to move forward certain forms of knowledges in the world. And so for me, I'm trying to think about hope. And I think the critique for me was in the way in which the knowledge production through anthropology was, I think it felt inadequate, right? Like it felt inadequate to just do the research. It felt inadequate just to do the theorization and to write this up into a manuscript. Because when I was, finishing up my ethnographic fieldwork with the Hmong patients with diabetes, we had we would have these diabetes group visits, and there was this Hmong man who came up to me at the end, was like, Mai See, can you do a diabetes group visit around Mocha Geshia, right? Like to have hope, a place to have hope. And I couldn't do that, right? And so a lot of times anthropology is about understanding what people's experiences are in the moment. And of course, I was trying to understand their experience, but then in this moment, I was being asked to do something and I couldn't do anything because I am just an observer. I'm just a researcher. And so that has stuck with me. That has stuck with me for a long time. And to think about hope as existing outside of institutions, because even in the clinic, they didn't even do a diabetes group visit on hope, because that, falls outside of the realm of examining the body, right? Of making sure that patients can take care of themselves, take care of their bodies. And so that there wasn't that either. And so I felt the failures on both sides, the failure in medicine and the failure in anthropology. And so that really led me to thinking about CDPR and thinking about, hope, I think in between, right? In between institutions and in between community and those kind of connections. So yeah, I hope I answered his question.
Yeah, and there's also another one in regards to CBPR. Were there any challenges in doing CBPR? If so, have you overcome challenges in disseminating your work into the Hmong community?
So, I was I've been doing CBPR for a long time. As a community member, right? As a community researcher, the one who they typically identify as community researcher. And I've now crossed over into the realm of the academic. And so for me, there's just so much tension in that, because when you say community-based participatory research, you'd often assume that the academic researcher is not Hmong, right? And at the same time, anthropology is the same way. You assume that the anthropologist is not Hmong, because then, that's when they do anthropological research, right? But when the person is Hmong doing research on Hmong stuff, then it's Hmong studies only. So, the challenges with CBPR, I've witnessed as a community researcher, I've seen the injustice with academic researchers kind of exploiting community researchers to do the research on their behalf, and then academics just publishing whatever they wanted without thinking about what the community researchers' contribution to that knowledge production is, right? And I think community researchers typically are interested in doing this work with academics because they don't have the full capacity or the skill set to do it, right? And in doing it in partnership. And so the knowledge should be co-created rather than one-sided. So that's one challenge. I think when you're doing CBPR with a refugee community like the Hmong, like, you know, I've had an academic say to me, like, why is it taking you so long to do translation? And I'm like, well, we don't have these words. And it's just like, well, can you cite the gold standard to do translation the way that you're doing it? And as somebody who critiques science, right, critiques these forms of objectivity, I was like, no, you can't do this. And you know, and then she asked my colleague, who is a community researcher, and they were like, no, it doesn't work in Somali like that either. You know, and it's unfortunate because there will be power dynamics like that being played out. And so knowing all of that, having been as a community researcher and now transitioning over as the academic partner, it has really informed the way I go about doing CBPR. I, you know, and I do also want to say, as a mother, right, as somebody who is a mother now, I think about research not so much as extractive. I think of research as life sustaining or life building, right? By building capacity, and making sure that you take the time to teach community partners social science theories, teaching them about the research methods so that they can then develop the capacity to live on, you know, without you, right? I feel like as a mother, that's all you're trying to do. Is like you're trying to bring up these little children to live in the world and to be able to do things, and to think critically, and to have deep and meaningful relationships, and give them the tools and skill sets to do that. And so I do that in research. I do that with my community partners, because you know, I might be here with them for a period of time, but reality is that I might move. The career might take me somewhere else. You know, so like I worked in Milwaukee, right? And so here I am at Oshkosh now, right? And so I want to leave behind critical tools and forms of analysis that they can continue to utilize in my absence. Yeah, and I think the other challenges of CBPR, let's see. I think, yeah, I think sometimes just the institutional challenges, sometimes that's difficult. I think institutions are set up to think about research in a very linear way, right? Where CBPR isn't always linear. And so sometimes when you don't fit that model, you have to do the work unpaid. You have to do the work when it's not during working hours. And you know, I think I've known that, right, as a community researcher, and I know that's what I signed up for. And even as an academic, you know, I'm willing to be flexible when these are the times that my community partners can meet, because they work full time, right? And it's really important to acknowledge that inequity in power relationships, right? And so how can I compensate for the fact that, you know, that you work full time, right, and not make it that you meet me during working hours only. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for answering those questions. We will have another section for questions later on in the interview. So if you all have any more questions, feel free to ask them later. Lisa, would you mind moving on to your set of questions?
Being a mother and relating it to research, I just blew my mind. But yeah, a lot of people were already asking questions about this. So this is going to go more into detail about your community-based research with Hmong and other refugee communities. And like we want you to expand on like your experiences and your beliefs, other than what you've already said here. So the first question is, you talked about your dissertation. Are there other work that you have, other projects, or like do you want to explain this one more in depth? Because I know a lot of students here are also undergraduate, so they may not be familiar with your work as well.
Yeah. So I have a grant. I have a Clinical Translational and Science Institute grant to the Medical College of Wisconsin that I applied for as a postdoc. And so just a little bit of background about my CDPR now as an academic, right? Not just as a community researcher. But I spent, the first year of my postdoc just getting to know my community partners and making sure that they were on the same, on the same page as me, right? That because certain types of partners aren't ready to think about issues of power, right? And so I, just connected with folks and just really talked about, my orientation in the world, the way I think about research, and getting to know each other without being like, oh, let me just do this research project, right? And why don't you partner with me? Not going in that way, but just really getting to know them. That really informed how I went about my work. And so I connected with United Outreach of Wisconsin organization in Milwaukee, and then the Hmong Chamber of Commerce, and getting to know just, their concerns and what they want to see and their hopes for an equitable future for the Hmong community, and making sure that, their vision and my vision, are similarly aligned, right? And how might we grow that together? And, through that, I, saw this grant opportunity to apply for a CTSI grant. And so I leveraged my dissertation data to apply for it, and then we got the funding. And so I've been training, so it's $50,000, which is not a lot in the health sciences for folks, right? But is so much in the social sciences. So it's to fund a one-year CBPR on the Hmong community to look at social determinants of health. And so this is where I love being somebody who borders, right? Social determinants of health is something that is really big and hot right now in the health sciences, but it is not at all anything that is new for us in anthropology. But understanding that kind of politics, I think, is really important to know, right? To know how to take certain theories in the humanities and the social sciences and connect it into the health sciences. Like, that was so exciting. I was citing critical refugee studies in my CTSI grant proposal, right? That was like standardized to the National Institute of Health, proposal. Like, you had to write it a certain way, and it had to be scientifically based. And so it was just so amazing for me to cite critical scholars into my sciencey proposal. And then to get it awarded was even more exciting. Yeah, so that, that grant, is near and dear to my heart. I love the team. I also mentored two underrepresented medical students on my project. And so teaching them how to do analysis, as future doctors in the world, it's important for them to think critically about power and to think about the patient beyond, right, their body in the clinical moment. There was this, powerful moment when we were reading some anthropological texts, and, my med student was saying that, Mai See, we typically, when we see patients, we get really, in the ER from, when they come into the ER from issues that are preventable, right? We often get really upset. But this lens of situating the person in this larger, social, historical, political context, thinking about issues of power, these larger factors, that disarms you, right? That allows you to actually see the person as a whole person and not be angry. Which, when you're angry, like, how do you provide care? Do that, And so it's so important to be grounded in that kind of analysis. And I'm so excited to be able to do that analysis with my community partners. So we taught them about the social determinants of health theory, but then we also, at the same time, we're like, why don't we start listing these things in the Hmong community? And as they started listing them, right, it's like Hmong patients who are older typically don't have access to an email, and that is what is in the electronic health medical records, right? You need to have emails to access all these things. And, and then they were listing other things like fear of neighborhood safety. They were listing, I don't have children to, take me to do the things that I wanted to do. And I'm like, this is so amazing, right? This is not what's in the literature, right? This is not what I typically see in the literature. And to have the community at the table to produce these things together is just so exciting. Like, I don't know, I always get so excited when I work with them that sometimes I have to calm down after each meeting. But yeah, it's just been so great.
What do you see happening with your research now that we're in COVID-19, how it impacts people you are working with, and like your future work and your future research as well.
Yeah, so folks that know me, I tend to draw on my refugee background all the time. It's the place, even if it's a sad place, it's a place of power for me, right? So, during COVID-19 and doing research, like, yes, that's challenging. I really want to see people. I want to be able to be in the same space to talk about their health issues and larger challenges. But the Hmong community, we've always been displaced, right? And so, it's so funny because when I was sitting with my community partners and my med students are also in the same room as me, we're like, oh, why don't we do phone conferencing? That's what Hmong people have been doing for so long, right? I'm like, oh, we didn't know that Hmong people were so ahead of their times. Like, they know how to do phone conferencing. They know how to do Facebook Messenger because they've always been having to connect to family that's been displaced, right? So they're used to this. They're used to being isolated. They're used to finding other ways and creative ways that draw on perhaps what people would say more ancient technology, right? The kind of technology that is so outdated, but they've taken these technologies and used it to connect abroad. And so now we're just tapping into that because of COVID-19. And so, yeah, I think, doing work with, people with diabetes, like they're high risk. And so you don't want to be exposing them to anything. And so we have to go virtual. And so it's just been so great brainstorming this with my team of community members. And I feel like I would rather just call them colleagues, right? And just kind of like mapping it out and thinking about who could do what, in testing and piloting whether WebEx would work, or, I would definitely do Facebook Messenger with them, but that does not meet IRB protocol, right? So this is where sometimes institutions may be a little bit difficult, right? Because there are standard, protocols in place that you can't jeopardize their confidentiality, even if it may be easier for access. Yeah.
And, with your research, how do you think it has impacted you and like you understanding your own experiences as well? Looking back at when you first started to like where you are now.
Oh, how has it impacted me? I have no clue. It's funny. I'm normally a quite reflective person, so that's a good question. Uh, you know, I think it's taken me places I didn't think I would be, right? I didn't think I would return. My dissertation is about Hmong Americans with diabetes and why they return back to Southeast Asia for health and healing. And it's so interesting to be somebody who returns home and to return back to rural Wisconsin. Um, it has shaped me in knowing that Hmong studies has important impact and implications for the Hmong community and beyond, right? I think I think like what I was saying earlier, sometimes when you're a Hmong person doing Hmong studies, you get pigeonholed, and that your work is too particular, too specific to just Hmong experiences. But for me, the Hmong studies is a lens in which you can think about larger issues such as U.S. empire building in Southeast Asia that results in the displacement of refugees, right? And the displacement of people, right? And the continual trauma of those people when you don't acknowledge that. I think, when we think about war, we think about US war. You can do it from a Hmong lens to think about the ways in which globalization and and war abroad, right? The ramifications of that for communities after that, even in Hmong communities in relationship to non-Hmong communities, right? How do how do how do you build community through the fact that war is something that is completely silenced or erased from that conversation, right? For me, Hmong studies allows us to think about the relationships between people rather than the difference, right? And so I try my hardest not to be like, this is Hmong culture, this is how Hmong people are, right? But to think about Hmong studies as something in relationship to larger humanities questions, right? Of like what it means to be what it means to suffer, right? What does suffering mean? What are the inequities in the world, right? How to think about power, and what are the remedies in that, right? And so for me, like in my work, I try to always provide agency to the folks that I do work with. And it's really important to think about their agency, and to think about the creative ways in which they go about the world, because it's through that that we have solutions, right? So kind of going back to my earlier discussion about the guy who asked me about, a group visit around hope, right? And like I was just thinking about it, and like that has actually informed how I do CBPR, right? That has informed the ways in which, so like I do CBPR, and it's going to create theory and it's going to create data, right? But I'm going to disseminate it back to the Hmong community. And I want solutions not just in the clinic, I want solutions in community, right? And so just like through those types of experiences, it informs how I decide to go back, or how I decide to have my work make a certain type of impact. Yeah, does that make sense?
So you brought it up, and Odyssey is going to talk about Hmong Studies at UW-Oshkosh because of your new position. He'll ask you on that.
Yeah.
A water break. I know you've been talking a lot.
I'm good. I have my coffee.
Okay. Well, to start, how are you transitioning to your new position at with COVID-19 and all the social justice movements going on?
So, it's not so hard for me. I think I've been doing this like remote stuff for a long time. Even when I was on maternity leave, I was still doing remote meetings. So it's not so hard. I think with, I just started my position August 1st. And so, when the whole George Floyd thing happened, I wasn't able to join in the conversations around that at UW-Oshkosh, but I definitely brought it back to the table with my community partners and really talked about anti-Blackness and provide them resources to think about, race as a social construct and give them access to kind of that, those types of histories. But at UW-Oshkosh, I honestly feel like I've hit the jackpot. The staff members, the Hmong staff members, I mean, they're amazing. They're so amazing. They're so kind. And the faculty is amazing. And shout out to the chancellor who's here, listening to us as well. Like, I feel so well supported. The Hmong students are so eager to learn. I was just telling the another faculty that my first class for the fall, I have more like over half of my students are Hmong, right? And that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna cry because like that's the first time. Like I used to like TA for anthropology classes, right? And I would get like one Hmong student and he would never come back. And then to have like a class like with over half of Hmong students, that was just so, I mean, that's just so beautiful. And then to read the roster, and I don't have to wait long to get to the T's and the X and the V's, like and the Y's. I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's so amazing. It's just so great because I think growing up, like you never found yourself in the curriculum, right? And then to be able to see yourself and your students, like that's even more amazing. So I'm so excited. Yeah.
UW's Oshkosh Hmong Studies program.
Well, yeah. Well, so I don't know if I have like a great answer, right? Like I think my colleagues and I, we were, she was also on the market for this position. I say that because I really believe in being transparent, and I'm really transparent with my community partners and just with my friends. She's great. She's great. But she took another job, but then this opportunity came to me, and I think at the time I was, I had also, with my grant money. And my project it started in August. And all the effort and all the work that I've been doing with community partners up until my new position as director, I knew that the Hmong community was at this pivotal moment, right? That they were ready to start producing knowledge about themselves. They were ready to start finding solutions for themselves. And so I think it was really important for me to stay in Wisconsin. And then as a director, right, to be able to like teach Hmong students to understand that Hmong studies through an interdisciplinarily, taught way can allow you to do so much more. And so I was so excited to be able to grow undergrads, having gone to like the Medical College of Wisconsin and being with like folks that are just so saturated in the sciences. It's just so nice to be able to go back to university too, and to read texts, right? To read the humanities, to read the social sciences as well, and to do that with students. Like I'm really excited to co-create with students. I don't want it to be where I just teach them what I think, right? But I also want to learn from them. And I also want to provide opportunities for students if they're interested in doing research with me, and to understand the power and the impact of being able to do work on your own community. I think Hmong Studies is amazing, because when I was an undergrad, like if I wasn't a student of Hmong American activism, right? If I wasn't a student of Dr. Lena, I don't know what grad school would have been like for me, right? I wouldn't have known the value of being able to do work from a Hmong Studies lens. And so, yeah, I think I was just happy to be able to teach undergrad students so that they could go on and grow the field, because I can't exist if I don't have new students coming in, right? The field isn't going to grow. And there are so many places in which the field needs to develop in, right? Like you guys, I'm like the second medical anthropologist who's Hmong, right? And I think it's so important. It's so important for there to be more. And yeah, like I think it's so important. Like a Hmong orientation to things is so important. I was on a talk with one of my long-term friends from undergrad, Yaking, who is a shaman, about water, right? And to talk about Hmong orientation towards water. And so the work, like, it's, I was talking to him, like, what is water in Hmong, right? Other than defining how Hmong people think about water, like, because he was talking about how water, there's different classifications of water. And certain water is good to consume, certain water, is bad for you. But also that water, he was talking with me about how water is also a form of literacy, right? Because for him, when he graduated, when he finished his apprenticeship to be a shaman, he was saying how water, you would drink hode, okay, right? To kind of solidify that he became a shaman. And so if water has the same potential and the same power in which we hold like written degrees, right? My PhD certificate, right? Those types of things. Like if you had that orientation towards the world around water, you would not treat water the way you do now, right? Like, so I think of it, I mean, I just think it's just so amazing that there's just so much work to be done. And I think that, a lot of Hmong studies is also reclaiming Hmong knowledge, because before my conversation with him, I thought water was just water, right? And so this is also where I love anthropology, because anthropology is about upsetting and destabilizing the ways we take for granted a lot of things in the world. It really draws attention and makes strange through the Hmong lens, right? Through Hmong studies, and makes strange these things that we assume is natural and as is, that actually draws attention to the fact that they are socially constructed. So I am taught to think of water as this one-dimensional thing that I just drink and bathe myself in, right? But to think about water as having other more qualities and other more potential, I think is very empowering, and it really shapes your relationship to these things. Yeah.
So, are there any short-term goals that you hope to establish during your time as the director? And what about long-term?
Yeah, short term. So I want to say I inherited this position. I don't want to say that I am like this is my position, right? I inherited this. So that means it comes from a legacy, and it comes from an important foundation. So these were Hmong students who advocated for this and was supported by the institution to create this position. And so they have wanted it to become, at first, so they wanted it to be a certificate and then to become a minor, and with the potential of it growing into a major. And so because I inherit that, that is my objective. As somebody who who understands being more collaborative in research and in program building. I want to build collaboratively within the UW system. I think Wisconsin is such an amazing place. Just the amount of youth and Hmong American student activism. Like, I think, what we were talking about, last week, I think, building collaborations within the UW system with my colleague, Dr. Kong Pa at UW-Eau Claire, connecting with UW-Milwaukee, connecting with UW-Madison and UW-Oshkosh. I think that would build such a strong Hmong Studies program. I think I want Hmong Studies to also not just be, as a medical anthropologist and as somebody who's trained at the Medical College of Wisconsin, I think it's also important to connect it with the health sciences as well, because I think that I think it's really needed, right? I think that orientation towards thinking about inequities, not inequities within the world, and thinking about communities as situated within larger contexts is so important in the education and the health sciences. And so I would love to do some connection in that way, because I know that a lot of healthcare professionals want to learn about the Hmong community, right? And they learn it through these oftentimes like essentialistic perspective around the community. Like, Hmong people believe in shamanism, Hmong people are X, Y, and Z, when actually we're a much more complex community, and we are always changing, right? And so I would love to build a program to give more people the kind of critical analysis to think about the Hmong community and other communities as well. But that's kind of like more of a long-term dream. But yes, right now I'm trying to push out the proposal for our certificate. I actually, when I was on maternity leave, I was actually looking at it and drafting it up. I'm happy to share a little bit more of what that proposal looks like, but I'm really excited. I drafted it up, and I made sure that the folks who were at the table who started the draft of the proposal are on board with it. And it's going to be a critical Hmong studies program. And what does critical mean, right? And that is about thinking about issues of power, engaging in theories that are interdisciplinary, like decolonialism, transnationalism, thinking about displacement, statelessness, right? So the kind of classes that I'm going to offer, I'm really excited. It's going to be like your basic intro to Hmong studies, but then I'm going to provide a theory course that around the types of theories that I see as influential in Hmong studies. And I'm really excited. I want to have a section on that around Hmong feminism. And I think it's amazing the way Hmong women are creating the field. I think it's amazing. Hmong women who often occupy marginalized positions in the Hmong community, and yet they're generating this wonderful wealth of knowledge and theory that includes them, right? That includes other people. So I haven't yet figured out what that section would look like, but I think it'd be amazing. And I know a couple of folks who've been writing really great things about Hmong studies through a feminist lens.
So, last question regarding UW-Oshkosh. Are there any challenges that you see coming up through your new role?
Challenges.
Any foreseeable challenges? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think for me, I think about sustainability, right? The challenges of the sustainability of it. Right now the students are really excited. I don't know if they're going to still be excited about me in a couple of years. I hope they'll still be excited. And so just like making sure that Hmong students, remember, right, where this program came out of. I think sometimes it's easy to forget that kind of history and why we still have to keep fighting for it, and why we have to keep engaging in these types of classes. So that's one challenge. I think financially, I think, to be real, like the UW system is having an economic impact, and especially with COVID-19 happening too, it's just going to be hard. And that's just the reality of it. And so understanding that challenge, I'm as somebody who was at the medical college, I'm really grant orientated, and so trying to think about how might we compensate for these economic challenges by applying for grants and building programs collectively. I'm really excited about, I think Dr. Kong Pa and them, would make such a great team, and I think it'd be strong a strong application. I'm calling Dr. Kong Pa. And I'm like already creating a grant with him and he doesn't even know it. But yeah, like, you know, just knowing those kind of economic challenges and having to be creative about that. I think, and the other challenges is I don't know if I would have, you know, I have a lot of the energy for it. I just don't know how much time is going to end up, you know, how much time is it going to take out of me. And, you know, it brings me a lot of joy, but sometimes I need to I guess maybe take a breather and take care of my kids sometimes. Sometimes I think with COVID-19, I've been working longer hours. My kids have been closing the door when I go to the I'm coming to the basement to go down to my office and they're like, no, you can't go down there. So those are some of the challenges, right, when you're working remotely. But yeah, those are the only things I see in the current future. I feel like right now with UW-Oshkosh, I feel like I'm really supportive. There's a Center for Teaching Excellence who, you know, they've reached out to me and said, you know, how can we collaborate? Folks at UW-Oshkosh are very collaborative, which I'm finding out, and it's really exciting. But it does take a lot of time to teach them like how to teach Hmong Studies, and to teach them about the stakes and the politics of the field, and you know, what are some of the problematic texts, right? I think that has to be laid out, and so that's going to take a lot of time. But yeah, like I stand by what I say. Like I feel like I hit the jackpot with UW-Oshkosh because folks are just amazing there.
We're actually in our last section of questions from the audience. I don't see any questions right now. If you have any questions to ask her, now's the time. If not, we'll move on to our last section. Going once, going twice. Okay, Lisa, did you want to end it?
Type in if you have something, but this would be your last questions of the night if it's just me. But before I ask the question, I just want to say, like, I'm very grateful for your work on, like, historical trauma and refugee experiences that you talked about here today. Your future work and the position you are in will change a lot of Hmong students' lives forever. As a Hmong woman, a medical anthropologist, a director, a mother, like you said. So yeah, it's a very amazing. And I know it has transformed my life as a Hmong woman with refugee parents, and it made me really think about how state violence from this country impacts like my family and the people I love. So yes, the Hmong students at Oshkosh are going to love you if they do not already, and I'm pretty sure because I already love you, so they're gonna love you a lot. So, like, for your last remarks here today, what would you like to say to the young people who advocated for your position, and will you be working with? And then there's like a broader question of what would you say to young people who are interested in participating in this movement for Hmong Studies as well?
Oh, those are big questions. It makes me feel like when you ask like older people, like what are your words of wisdom? And I'm like, I don't know if I have any, right? Yeah, I don't know if I have any words of wisdom. But I think that the important thing is that people, I think, students see this, like right now, like it may be we want to see ourselves in the curriculum, but the reason why we want to see ourselves in the curriculum is because knowledge is power, right? It's because it provides us potential to find creative ways to solve issues within our community, outside of our community. And so, yeah, I think to the Hmong students who advocated for my position, like, thank you. Oh my gosh, like you guys are amazing. Like, that, and it's important, like, right? It's important, like that knowledge. Like, I think we need to really think critically about knowledge and knowledge production and the ways that we are taught. That it is so important the way and how we see ourselves, but also how we create more knowledge, because knowledge is impactful, right? The ways in which communities are represented could be harmful, and it's important to critique those types of representation. And and you know, like what I was saying earlier, like we can't find creative solutions if we don't ground ourselves in the community. It's easy for us to sit in these high ivory tower to make these, you know, recommendations, but at the end of the day, those recommendations come back and impact community. And so it's important to just to really be situated in that way and at that intersection. Um, and then what was your last question?
Young people who are interested in participating in this movement for Hmong studies, and like haven't like accessed it or like found ways to move about it.
Yeah. I think you know, I think so when I was doing research on Hmong older adults, um, I think what I was getting from folks was that, you know, this is identity politics, right? This is me doing work on myself. And yes, it is work on myself. Let's be real, right? But it's not just that too. And I think that I think students need to understand that Hmong studies provides a form of analysis, right? That allows you to situate and contextualize your experiences. And so I hope that Hmong students who are interested, and students in general, right, who are interested in the courses, can understand that it's not just, for me, it's not just always about like, you know, particular types of facts, but the kind of analysis and the critical lens that it trains you into seeing the world is so important. And that I think for, you know, students of color is your mode of survival, right? When you're dealing with injustice all the time, when you're dealing with inequities, it's important to be able to analyze the situation beyond you, right? Because sometimes when you're so caught up in it and you think of it individually, I think that becomes the hardest part. But when you understand that you are in this world, right, in a world with like larger structural inequality, and that analysis allows you to thrive a little bit more, and for you to then draw certain types of creative solutions in those spaces. And so I think for me, Hmong Studies does that for me. And so I hope that students who take Hmong Studies and who sees this movement can see the worth in it, right? Even if you're not a Hmong Studies major, even if you're a science major, right? Just kind of the analysis and the lens, what it would do for folks and for other disciplines as well. Yeah.
Well, again, thank you for joining us today. So we do have a question. Is there any way for people to connect with you, Dr. Tao?
Oh yeah, definitely email me. Should we type in my email on there?
Yeah, if you can.
Yeah, I would do that. Yeah, feel free to email me. I'm always happy to talk. Here's my email. Yeah.
Right. And again, it was so exciting to hear about your work and what you're planning to do for Hmong Studies, especially at UW-Oshkosh. They should be extremely grateful to have you.
Well, I'm really grateful to have them. I'm
Yeah,
really
and we wish you
excited.
nothing but luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, to end, thank you. Well, Lisa, do you have anything to say? Sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say bye to everyone.
Well, again, thank you to everyone for joining us today with Dr. Mai See Thao. It was amazing to interview her, and we hope that you all have a good day. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.